A 1970 Plymouth Barracuda painted vitamin C orange, piloted through the canals of Venice and the streets of Philadelphia by one of the most compelling actresses working in Hollywood. A car so perfectly cast, it didn't need a close-up to own every scene it was in. And then the cameras stopped rolling, the production wrapped, and the car just disappeared. Not into a museum, not into a temperature-controlled collector's garage with a certificate of authenticity bolted to the wall. It disappeared the way most movie cars disappear, quietly, without ceremony, handed off and passed along, until the story got so thin it nearly snapped entirely. This is the real story of what happened to the Italian job Barracuda, and some of it is going to make you genuinely angry. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle. This channel exists for one reason: to go find the cars that made your favorite films what they are, and figure out what actually happened to them after Hollywood was done with them. Not the press release version, not the myth, the real story, wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. If you're new here, hit subscribe now, and let's get into it. The car itself. What is a 1970 Cuda, and why does it matter? Before we talk about the film, we need to talk about the car. Because if you don't understand what a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda actually is, you won't fully understand what was at stake when a film production got its hands on several of them and then treated them like rental equipment. The Barracuda has a complicated legacy in American muscle car history, and that's actually part of what makes it so interesting. Plymouth introduced the Barracuda in 1964, which makes it technically the first pony car to market, beating the Mustang by 2 weeks. Go ahead and sit with that. 2 weeks. History remembered the Mustang. The Barracuda spent decades being the answer to a trivia question. That's a genuinely unfair outcome for a genuinely great car. But the generation that matters for this story, the generation that the film used, and the generation that collectors lose their minds over, is the E-body third generation. 1970 to 1974. This is where Plymouth stopped apologizing and started swinging. The 1970 Cuda, which is what the performance variant was called, was offered with an engine list that reads like someone at Chrysler Engineering had completely lost their mind in the best possible way. You could order it with a 340 cubic inch small block. You could order it with a 383. You could order it with a 446 pack, meaning 3 two-barrel carburetors, sitting on top of that engine like a crown. And at the top of the options list, so outrageously powerful it became an instant legend, sat the 426 Hemi. Dual 4-barrel carburetors, hemispherical combustion chambers, and enough torque to make you question your life choices at 40 miles per hour. Chrysler officially rated the Hemi at 425 horsepower. Nobody who has ever been in one believes that number. It was a gentleman's agreement between the manufacturers and the insurance industry, and the insurance industry was not getting the better end of that deal. Production numbers on the 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible specifically are the stuff of collector legend. 14 were built for the domestic market. 14. There are medium-sized apartment buildings with more units than that. A documented numbers-matching 1970 Hemi Cuda convertible in top condition doesn't get sold. It gets inherited, argued over in probate court, and talked about at car shows for 20 years before anyone will even discuss a price. The last time one crossed an auction block in serious condition, the conversation started north of $3 million and moved upward from there. Even the more attainable Cudas, the 440 cars, the 340 small block cars, command serious money in the collector market today. Because 1970 was the last year before federal emissions regulations started strangling the life out of American performance engines. The 1970 Cuda is the last completely uncompromised expression of what Detroit could do when nobody was telling them to slow down. That's what makes it a landmark. That's what makes putting one in a film a statement. And that's what makes what happened after production wrapped so hard to stomach. The Italian Job. What the film was and why the car mattered. The 2003 remake of The Italian Job is a film that gets undersold constantly, and I'll die on that hill. F. Gary Gray directing, a cast that included Mark Wahlberg, Edward Norton, Jason Statham, Mos Def, and Seth Green, and a screenplay that understood exactly what it needed to be. It wasn't trying to replace the 1969 original, it was doing its own thing in its own register. A slick, confident, genuinely entertaining heist film that happened to contain one of the better car chases of the early 2000s. The Mini Coopers get all the attention, and fine, they earned it. 3 minis navigating the Los Angeles subway system is a legitimate cinematic achievement, but the car that actually defines the film's personality, the car that tells you what kind of movie you're watching before the plot kicks in, is Charlize Theron's 1970 Cuda. Theron plays Stella Bridger, a safecracker with a very specific aesthetic and a very specific attitude. When you meet Stella, she is in possession of a vitamin C orange 1970 Cuda. She didn't need a backstory monologue. She didn't need 3 scenes establishing her credentials. The car did it in a single shot. You see that orange Cuda, you understand immediately who Stella Bridger is, what she values, and how much you should underestimate her at your own peril. That is exactly what a well-chosen movie car does. It does the screenwriter's job before a single word of dialogue is delivered. And the Cuda does it perfectly here, because the Cuda is not a car that goes unnoticed. It is not a car for people who want to blend in. It is loud. It is specific. It is unapologetically itself. Same as Stella, the production filmed across multiple locations. Venice, Italy for the opening sequences, Philadelphia for the domestic scenes. And in both locations, those orange Barracudas had to perform. Not just sit there looking cinematic. Actually perform. That matters a great deal for what happened to them afterward. Who built the cars and how many existed? Now, here's where the story gets complicated. And this is the part that most people who talk about this car get wrong or skip entirely. The production of the Italian job did not use one 1970 Cuda. They used multiple cars. This is standard practice for any serious film production involving valuable or irreplaceable vehicles. You build a hero car for the close work, the interior shots, the scenes where the camera needs to live with the machine. And then you build stunt cars for the sequences that are going to put stress on the vehicle, the hard cornering, the high-speed runs, the moments where something might go wrong, because something always goes wrong. Sourcing multiple 1970 Cudas for a 2003 film production was not a simple task. These cars were already 33 years old. They were already collectible. Finding enough of them to sacrifice to a film production required serious legwork and, frankly, a budget line that most productions would have balked at. The Italian job had that budget. Paramount Pictures was not making this film on the cheap. The cars were sourced and prepared for production, finished in that unmistakable vitamin C orange, which is an actual factory color option from the 1970 model year. Not a custom mix, not a production invention. That orange was available from the Chrysler factory. The film's production designers knew exactly what they were doing when they chose it, and honestly, respect for that level of period accuracy. The Venice sequences presented a particular logistical challenge that doesn't get discussed enough. Venice is not a city that accommodates American muscle cars in any conventional sense. The streets that exist are narrow, the logistics are medieval, and the canals are emphatically not roads. Getting those cars to Venice, filming with them in the context of that environment, and getting them back out again required coordination that went well beyond what most productions deal with. Those cars worked hard in Italy. They worked hard again in Philadelphia. By the time production wrapped, every one of them had been through something. And then Paramount did what studios do. They moved on. No one flagged the vehicles for preservation. No archivist pulled the production records and attached them to the VINs. The cars went back through the channels that movie cars go back through when nobody decides they're worth saving. Let me say that again because this pattern appears in every single one of these stories, and it never stops being infuriating. At no point during the wrap of a major Paramount Pictures production, featuring multiple examples of one of the most collectible American muscle cars ever built, did anyone in a position of authority say, "Hold on, we should probably keep track of these." It did not happen. And 2 decades later, we are all living with the consequences of that institutional indifference. What happened after the cameras stopped? So where did they actually go? This is where the trail gets thin, and honesty requires acknowledging what we know versus what we can confirm. What we know with reasonable confidence is that at least one of the production Cudas entered private hands after filming, wrapped and can be traced through a partial ownership chain. Forum documentation on dedicated Mopar enthusiast communities, particularly those focused on e-body Barracudas, contains threads dating back to the mid-2000s, where individuals claiming direct knowledge of the production cars describe their post-filming dispersal. These threads are not certified provenance. They are forum posts, but they are consistent in enough specific details to be taken seriously as a starting point. One car, believed to be among the stunt vehicles rather than the primary hero car, surfaced briefly in the Southern California area in the years following production. The reporting on this comes from enthusiast communities rather than auction documentation, which means the chain of custody is informal at best. Whether that car still exists in screen-accurate configuration, whether it has been modified, sold on again, or simply sits in a garage somewhere with an owner who may or may not know its history, is genuinely unclear. Here's the complicating factor that makes tracking these cars uniquely difficult. And it's a factor that doesn't apply to something like the Cobra Mercury or the Training Day Monte Carlo in quite the same way. The 1970 Cuda is one of the most replicated, cloned, and tribute-built cars in American muscle car culture. The combination of desirability, the stratospheric values of documented original examples, and the relative availability of donor cars from lesser Barracuda variants means that the market is absolutely flooded with very convincing recreations. A vitamin C orange Cuda with the right wheels and a 440 under the hood can be built to look completely screen accurate for a fraction of what an original costs. Dozens of them exist, probably more than dozens, honestly. This creates a genuine identification problem. Without documentation, without a VIN that traces directly back to the production, there is no reliable way to distinguish a genuine Italian job production car from an extremely well-executed tribute build. And that gap is exactly where bad information proliferates. Someone shows up at a car show with an orange Cuda, mentions the Italian job, and suddenly the story is in circulation. I've seen at least 3 separate cars online in the last few years described by their owners as Italian job cars. They cannot all be right. They may all be wrong. The trails, what we know, what we don't, and one survivor. One confirmed, survivor does appear in the documented record with stronger provenance than the others. And I want to be careful with that word, confirmed, because in the world of movie car research, confirmed exists on a spectrum. This isn't a VIN traced back to a Paramount production manifest with a notarized chain of custody going back to 2003. That document doesn't exist, or if it does, nobody's produced it publicly. What we have instead is something more common in this world, and honestly more interesting. A convergence of sources. People with direct knowledge of the production describing the same car in consistent detail. Build specifications that match what was put on screen. An ownership history that, while not perfectly unbroken, doesn't contradict itself in the ways that fake provenance stories almost always eventually do. The car exists in private hands somewhere in the continental United States. That's about as specific as the trail gets without crossing into speculation. Its owner, by every account that has surfaced in enthusiast communities and collector circles, is not interested in selling. No auction house has been called. No Barrett-Jackson lot card has been filled out. No velvet rope, no museum placard, no insurance appraisal being shopped around to establish a headline number. Just a car, sitting somewhere, owned by someone who knows exactly what they have and has made a deliberate, apparently considered decision not to turn that knowledge into money. I want to sit with that for a second because it cuts against the grain of how these stories usually go. The default assumption in collector car culture is that everything has a price. That provenance is a lever you pull when you're ready to cash out. That the whole point of owning something historically significant is eventually converting that significance into a transaction. Barrett-Jackson built an entire business model on that assumption, and it has made them extraordinarily wealthy. But every now and then you find someone who just doesn't. Someone who owns a piece of cinematic history and treats it the way you'd treat something genuinely personal. Not an asset, not a future auction lot. Just a car that means something to them for reasons that don't require a public explanation or a bidding war to validate. Honestly, I respect it. More than I can adequately say. Not every car needs to end up under museum lighting with a QR code next to it, explaining its significance to people in comfortable shoes. Some cars are just meant to be owned, driven maybe, looked at on a Tuesday morning when nothing else is going right, kept close for reasons that have nothing to do with market value and everything to do with what the thing actually means to the person who has it, the Italian job. Cuda that's still out there in private hands may never surface publicly. And if that's how it ends, that might actually be the right ending for a car built to be exactly what it looks like. Unapologetically itself, not for sale, not for show, just there. Charlize Theron, the car, and the question nobody asked. Now, here's the question that nobody seems to have asked directly, and I find the silence around it genuinely interesting. Did Charlize Theron try to keep one? Think about what that question actually implies. She spent weeks with these cars. She learned to drive one convincingly enough that the camera believed her. She embodied a character whose entire personality was communicated through her relationship with that orange Barracuda before a single line of dialogue established who Stella Bridger was. That is not a casual relationship with a vehicle. That is an intimate one. And yet, when production wrapped, there is no story. Nothing. Silence where a story should be. Compare that silence to what we know about Sylvester Stallone and the Cobra Mercury. Stallone didn't just drive that car on screen. He owned it personally before production began. He brought it to the film. He kept it afterward. And when it was stolen 17 years later, he didn't shrug and move on. He filed a lawsuit against the company trying to sell it, and his legal team opened the complaint with a direct quote from the film itself. "Crime is a disease. Meet the cure." That is not a man who had a professional relationship with a vehicle. That is a man who understood exactly what that car meant and was prepared to go to Los Angeles County Superior Court to prove it. Theron is not Stallone, and that's not a criticism. Different people relate to objects differently. Some actors finish a film and walk away cleanly. No attachments, no souvenirs, just on to the next thing. That is a completely legitimate way to exist in the world, and frankly, probably a healthier psychological approach than suing people over stolen muscle cars. No judgment there whatsoever. But here's why the distinction matters beyond the personal. When a celebrity takes physical possession of a film vehicle, even informally, even temporarily, it creates something. It creates a custody chain. It creates a story with a named protagonist that researchers and collectors can follow. It creates the kind of documented provenance that keeps a car identifiable and traceable for decades after the production closes. Stallone kept his Mercury, and we have a 20-year story involving theft, a lawsuit, and an eventual recovery. The story exists because the man existed inside it. Theron apparently didn't keep hers, and so we have a question mark where a story should be. The Cuda re-entered the general population with no celebrity guardian attached, no named custodian, no anchor point to organize the history around. And without that anchor, the trail moves fast in the wrong direction. That is how thin the margin is between a car that survives as a documented cultural artifact and a car that dissolves permanently into the used vehicle market. Not decades of neglect, not institutional failure on a grand scale, just one decision made in the weeks after a production wraps by one person who may not have even realized they were making it. One phone call that didn't happen, one conversation that never started, and then the car is just gone into the world with nobody watching. What a surviving example is worth today. Let's talk about money for a moment, because the financial dimension of this story is clarifying in a way that should make everyone uncomfortable. A documented screen-used, the 1970 Cuda, from a major studio production in 2003, is not just a muscle car. It is a muscle car plus a provenance story, plus a pop culture attachment, plus a celebrity connection. Each of those things adds value independently. Together, they compound. A clean, numbers-matching 1970 Cuda with a 440 and a desirable color is already a six-figure car in the current market without any film connection whatsoever. Put verified Italian job provenance behind it, attach Charlize Theron's name to the ownership history, add Paramount Pictures documentation, and you are having a very different conversation. Conservatively, you're looking at values that start somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 and move upward depending on which car, which documentation, and which auction house is handling it. That gap between what these cars are worth today and how casually they were disposed of in 2003 is the thing that keeps coming back to me every time I dig into one of these stories. The studio spent serious money sourcing and building those Cudas. And then, when the production was over, no one apparently spent 5 minutes thinking about what they were worth as cultural artifacts, or what they might be worth in 20 years. They went back through the system the same way a fleet vehicle goes back to a rental company, efficiently, anonymously, irreversibly. Where this leaves us and what comes next. Here's what we're actually left with. Multiple 1970 Plymouth Barracudas were sourced, prepared, and used in the production of The Italian Job. They were filmed in Venice and Philadelphia. They were worked hard. When production wrapped, they re-entered private circulation through channels that left minimal documentation behind. One car exists in private hands with stronger provenance than the others and is apparently not for sale. The remaining production vehicles are either in private custody with owners of varying degrees of awareness about what they have been modified beyond screen-accurate configuration, and exist without documentation, or in the worst-case scenario, are gone entirely, dissolved into the used car pipeline the same way so many other movie cars have been before them. The replica problem means the waters are muddied in a way that may never fully clear without a dedicated research effort, and that effort hasn't happened at the scale it would require, not yet. What this story has in common with every other story on this channel is the pattern underneath it. The cars that mattered most got treated like production equipment. Nobody made the call to preserve them, and the only reason any of them survive in identifiable form today is because private individuals, enthusiasts, researchers, people who cared enough to go looking, did the work that the studios didn't do. If you have a credible lead on where any of the Italian Job production Cudas ended up, the comment section below is open, and I mean that seriously. Not looking for speculation, not looking for someone whose cousin heard something. Looking for documentation, VINs, ownership records, anything with paper behind it. These cars deserve a real accounting, and that accounting starts with someone who actually knows something deciding to talk. If this one hit different, drop a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe to American Muscle. We go where the cars go, and we don't stop until we find them. We'll see you in the next lane.